The morning mist clung to the Afghan mountains like a shroud, and Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her grip on what her fellow soldiers mockingly called museum piece. The rifle in her hands was a vintage M24 sniper weapon system, manufactured in 1988, older than some of the soldiers in her unit. While her comrades carried state-of-the-art equipment with digital scopes and computerized rangefinders, Maria had specifically requested this weathered, battle-scarred weapon that had seen action in 3 different conflicts before finding its way to her hands. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The year was 2011, and Maria's unit was stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman in Afghanistan's Khost province, one of the most dangerous regions in the country. The Taliban had been increasingly active in the area, launching coordinated attacks against coalition forces and disrupting supply lines that were crucial for maintaining operations throughout the region. What made this particular morning different was the intelligence report that had come in during the pre-dawn hours. A high-value target convoy was expected to move through the valley below, carrying weapons and supplies that could fuel insurgent operations for months. Maria had earned her reputation as one of the finest marksmen in the 3rd Infantry Division through years of dedication and an almost supernatural ability to read wind patterns, atmospheric pressure, and the subtle environmental factors that separated good snipers from legendary ones. But her choice of weapon had always been a source of controversy among her peers and superiors. In an age where military technology advanced at breakneck speed, her insistence on using the older M24 system seemed not just outdated, but potentially dangerous. The M24 sniper weapon system was based on the Remington 700 bolt-action rifle, a design that had proven itself reliable across decades of military service. Maria's particular rifle had been manufactured during the height of the Cold War, when American military planners were focused on potential conflicts with Soviet forces across European battlefields. The weapon had first seen combat during the Gulf War in 1991, where it had served with distinction in the hands of a Marine sniper who had used it to eliminate enemy positions at ranges exceeding 800 meters. After the Gulf War, the rifle had been refurbished and reassigned to an Army Ranger unit, where it had performed admirably during the early stages of the Iraq War. The weapon had been present during the Battle of Fallujah in 2004, where it had been used to provide overwatch for infantry units clearing buildings in some of the most intense urban combat American forces had experienced since Vietnam. The rifle had saved countless lives during those operations, picking off insurgents who had positioned themselves to ambush American patrols. But by 2011, military procurement officers and field commanders were pushing for newer systems. The M24 was being phased out in favor of more modern platforms like the M110 semi-automatic sniper system and the M201 enhanced sniper rifle. These newer weapons offered advantages in terms of accuracy, range, and adaptability to different mission requirements. They featured advanced optics, improved ergonomics, and manufacturing tolerances that promised better consistency and reliability. Maria's fellow soldiers didn't understand her attachment to what they saw as obsolete equipment. Lieutenant Kevin Morrison, her spotter and closest friend in the unit, had repeatedly tried to convince her to upgrade to newer systems. "Maria, you're handicapping yourself," he would say during their training sessions. "The new rifles have better accuracy, longer range, and more reliable scopes. Why are you holding onto that antique?" But Maria saw something in her M24 that others missed. She had spent hundreds of hours learning every nuance of the weapon's behavior. She knew exactly how it would perform in different weather conditions, understood the subtle variations in its ballistics that came from years of use, and had developed an almost intuitive sense of how to compensate for the weapon's quirks and characteristics. To her, The rifle wasn't just a tool, it was a partner that had earned her trust through countless training exercises and previous deployments. The morning of the mission, as Maria prepared her equipment and checked her ammunition, she could feel the skeptical glances from other members of her unit. Captain James Patterson, the mission commander, had expressed reservations about her weapon choice during the briefing. "Rodriguez, I need to know that you can deliver when it counts," he had said. "This isn't a training exercise. If that convoy gets through, we'll be dealing with the consequences for months." Maria had simply nodded and continued her preparations. She had cleaned and inspected every component of her rifle, verified the accuracy of her scope, and calculated the ballistic tables for the expected engagement ranges. The ammunition she carried was standard 7.62 x 51 mm NATO rounds, the same type that had been used in the weapon since its introduction. Unlike some of her colleagues who preferred specialized match-grade ammunition, Maria had always believed that familiarity with standard military rounds was more important than marginal improvements in accuracy. As the unit moved into position, in the pre-dawn darkness, Maria felt the weight of expectation on her shoulders. This mission would either vindicate her choice to stick with the older weapon system or prove that she had been foolishly romantic about outdated equipment. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and failure wasn't an option. The observation post overlooked a narrow valley that served as a natural corridor for movement between Taliban strongholds in the region. Intelligence reports indicated that the convoy would consist of 3 to 4 vehicles, likely including at least one technical pickup truck mounted with a heavy machine gun, and possibly an armored vehicle captured from Afghan National Army forces during previous engagements. The convoy was expected to be carrying not just weapons and ammunition, but also a high-ranking Taliban commander who had been coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the province. Maria settled into her firing position as the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Her M24 was equipped with a Leupold Mark IV scope, the same optic that had been mounted on the rifle for the past several years. While newer scopes offered digital displays and more advanced reticles, Maria preferred the simplicity and reliability of her current setup. She had memorized every marking on the reticle and knew exactly how to use it for range estimation and windage corrections. Lieutenant Morrison positioned himself beside her with his spotting scope, ready to call out targets and provide ballistic corrections. The two had worked together for over 18 months, developing the kind of seamless communication that was essential for effective sniper operations. Morrison had initially been skeptical of Maria's weapon choice, but he had come to respect her expertise and had learned to work with the M24's capabilities and limitations. "Contact," Morrison whispered into his radio headset. 3 vehicles approaching from the north, approximately 2 kilometers out. Through his spotting scope, he could make out the details of the convoy: a lead vehicle that appeared to be a modified pickup truck, followed by what looked like a captured Humvee, and finally another pickup truck bringing up the rear. The vehicles were moving at a steady pace, suggesting that the drivers were confident in their security and unaware of the American presence in the overwatch position. Maria began her calculations, taking into account the range to target, wind speed and direction, atmospheric pressure, and the angle of the shot. The M24's 7.62 x 51 rounds had a muzzle velocity of approximately 2,580 feet per second, which meant that at the expected engagement range of 600 to 800 meters, she would need to account for significant bullet drop and wind drift. Unlike modern computerized systems that could calculate these factors automatically, Maria had to rely on her training, experience, and mental calculations. The convoy continued its approach, following the winding mountain road that would bring it directly through the kill zone that had been established for the mission. Maria could see through her scope that the vehicles were heavily loaded, with supplies and equipment strapped to their roofs and sides. The lead vehicle definitely mounted a heavy machine gun, and she could make out at least 2 armed fighters in the back of the truck. Range 700 meters, Morrison called out softly. Wind 3 miles per hour from the east. Maria made metered adjustments to her scope settings and shifted her position slightly to account for the wind conditions. The morning air was still relatively calm, which would work in her favor, but she knew that conditions could change rapidly in the mountains. As the convoy drew closer, Maria could make out more details about the vehicles and their occupants. The captured Humvee in the middle of the convoy appeared to be heavily armored, with steel plates welded over the windows and additional protection around the wheels and engine compartment. This was likely where the high-value target would be. Traveling, protected by the armor and positioned between the 2 escort vehicles. 600 meters, Morrison updated. Target identification confirmed. That's our package in the middle vehicle. The intelligence had been accurate. The convoy was exactly what they had been briefed to expect, and the timing was perfect. The vehicles would be in the optimal engagement zone within the next 60 seconds. Maria felt her heart rate slow as she entered the focused mental state that she had cultivated through years of training. Her breathing became deep and regular. Her grip on the rifle relaxed but firm, and her entire attention focused on the sight picture in her scope. The M24 felt solid and familiar in her hands, its weight and balance as comfortable as an old friend. The criticism from her fellow soldiers about her weapon choice faded into the background as she prepared for the shot that would determine the success or failure of the mission. She had trained for this moment countless times, both in controlled range environments and in the stress of combat situations. The M24 had never let her down before, and she trusted it completely despite its age and the skepticism of others. 500 meters, Morrison called out. Multiple targets visible in all 3 vehicles. Recommend engagement on the lead vehicle first. The tactical plan called for Maria to disable the lead vehicle first, which would likely cause the convoy to stop and create confusion among the remaining vehicles. This would give other elements of the unit time to move into position for the follow-up phases of the operation. Maria centered her crosshairs on the driver of the lead vehicle, a technique that would not only eliminate the immediate threat, but also cause the vehicle to crash or stop suddenly. The shot would need to be perfect at this range. With the target moving at approximately 30 miles per hour, she would have only one opportunity to make the shot count: the weight of the mission. The skepticism of her colleagues and the reputation of her chosen weapon all converged on this single moment. Maria took a deep breath, held it halfway, and began to apply pressure to the trigger of her antique M24. What happened in the next few seconds would determine not just the success of the mission, but the vindication of everything she believed about the relationship between a sniper and their weapon. The physics of the shot were complex, requiring Maria to account for not just the distance to target, but also the lateral movement of the convoy vehicles and the subtle environmental factors that could affect bullet trajectory. At 500 meters, the M24's 7.62 x 5.1mm round would drop approximately 27 inches from the line of sight, assuming standard atmospheric conditions. The easterly wind, though mild, would push the bullet slightly to the left, requiring a compensation of roughly 3 inches at this range. But Maria wasn't thinking about the mathematics as she settled into her final firing position. Years of training had internalized these calculations, turning them into instinctive adjustments that her body made automatically. Her left hand supported the rifle's forestock with steady pressure, while her right hand gripped the stock with just enough tension to maintain control without inducing tremors. Her cheek rested against the stock in exactly the same position she had practiced thousands of times, ensuring consistent sight alignment. The lead vehicle continued its approach, the driver apparently unaware of the danger that waited in the rocks above. Through her scope, Maria could see the man's face partially obscured by a traditional Afghan pakal hat, His attention focused on navigating the winding mountain road. In the back of the truck, two fighters sat casually with their weapons resting. Across their laps, scanning the surrounding terrain but failing to detect the well-concealed American position. "Target steady at 450 meters, Morrison whispered into his radio. "Wind holding at 3 miles per hour from the east. Green light for engagement." The words were barely audible, but Maria heard them clearly. The moment had arrived, and everything depended on the reliability of the weapon that her colleagues had dismissed as obsolete. Maria's finger found the trigger of the M24, a component that had been manufactured over 2 decades earlier, but maintained with meticulous care throughout its service life. The trigger pull weight was exactly 3.5 pounds, a specification that had been verified during routine maintenance just a week before the mission. She began to apply pressure gradually, feeling the familiar resistance that preceded the firing sequence. The crosshairs of her scope were centered on the driver's upper torso, accounting for the vehicle's movement and the ballistic trajectory of the round. Maria's breathing had settled into a slow, controlled rhythm, and she fired during the natural pause between breaths, when her body was most stable and her aim most precise. The technique was identical to what she had practiced countless times on shooting ranges from Fort Benning to Quantico, but the stakes had never been higher. The M24 fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley, the sound of the shot mixing with the mechanical action of the bolt as it cycled the spent cartridge case. Maria felt the familiar recoil against her shoulder, a sensation that had become as natural as breathing during her years of service. The muzzle flash was minimal, thanks to the rifle's effective flash suppressor, but the sound would certainly alert the convoy to their presence. Through her scope, Maria watched the 168-grain match bullet travel across the valley in a trajectory that seemed to bend through the air like a visible thread connecting her position to the target. The flight time at this range was approximately 0.6 seconds, but it felt like an eternity as she tracked the bullet's path and waited to see the result of her shot. The bullet struck the driver with devastating accuracy, hitting him in the upper chest and causing him to slump forward over the steering wheel. The lead vehicle immediately began to veer off the road, its momentum carrying it toward a rocky outcropping on the left side of the valley. The fighter in the passenger seat grabbed for the steering wheel, but his reaction came too late to prevent the crash. "Target down," Morrison called out excitedly. "Direct hit on the driver. Lead vehicle is disabled." The pickup truck crashed into the rocks with a grinding impact that could be heard clearly from the observation post. Steam began to rise from the damaged radiator, and the engine made grinding noises before finally falling silent. The reaction from the other vehicles was immediate and predictable. The captured Humvee in the middle of the convoy came to an abrupt stop, its occupants apparently unsure of whether to continue forward or retreat. The rear pickup truck also stopped, and Maria could see fighters jumping out of the vehicle and taking cover behind the engine block and doors. "Preparing for follow-up shots," Maria announced as she worked the bolt of her M24, ejecting the spent cartridge case and chambering a fresh round. The mechanical action of the bolt was smooth and precise, exactly as it had been during thousands of training exercises. Despite its age, the rifle was functioning flawlessly under combat conditions. The success of the first shot had vindicated Maria's choice to stick with the older weapon system, but the mission was far from over. The convoy had been stopped, but the high-value target was still in the armored Humvee, and the remaining fighters were beginning to organize a defensive response. Several of them had already identified the general direction of the sniper fire, and were preparing to return fire with their own weapons. "Contact front," Morrison called out as muzzle flashes began to appear from the stopped convoy. "Multiple enemy personnel deploying from vehicles. They've got us spotted." Bullets began to impact the rocks around their position, sending chips of stone flying and creating the distinctive whining sound of RICOCHE. Maria remained calm and focused, her confidence in the M24 system unshaken by the incoming fire. She had weathered similar situations before, and she knew that her position was well protected and difficult to pinpoint precisely. The enemy fire was largely suppressive, designed to keep her from taking additional shots rather than actually hitting her position. The real test of both her skills and her weapon was just beginning, and as the echo of her first shot faded across the valley, Maria knew that everything that followed would determine whether her faith in the M24 had been justified or misplaced. As Maria prepared to engage the convoy that was now bearing down on their position, she could feel the weight of every doubt that had been cast upon her choice of weapon. In the next few critical moments, the M24 would either prove its worth or validate every criticism that had been leveled against it. The incoming fire was intensifying, but Maria's focus remained absolute. She had trained for exactly this type of engagement, and her rifle was about to demonstrate why experience and reliability could triumph over technological novelty. As the convoy vehicles continued their relentless approach toward the kill zone, Maria's mind shifted into the calculating precision that had made her one of the division's most respected snipers. Every variable that could affect her shot was being processed and accounted for: wind speed, atmospheric pressure, target movement, and the subtle characteristics of her M24 that she had learned through countless hours of practice. The echo of Maria's first shot had barely faded when the tactical situation exploded into chaos. The incoming fire intensified as more fighters emerged from the disabled convoy and began to coordinate their defensive efforts, transforming what had been a clean ambush into a deadly firefight that would test both Maria's skills and the reliability of her controversial weapon choice. Maria could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different positions, including what appeared to be a PKM machine gun that had been set up behind the rear vehicle. The heavy machine gun's rounds were striking uncomfortably close to their position, sending up sprays of rock fragments and creating a distinctive buzzing sound as they passed overhead. "We need to neutralize that machine gun," Morrison called out, his voice tight with tension as he tracked the enemy movements through his spotting scope. "They're getting our range, and it's only a matter of time before they start hitting us." The PKM was a Soviet-era weapon that had been widely distributed throughout Afghanistan during the 1980s, and in the hands of experienced fighters, it could be devastatingly effective at ranges up to 1,000 meters. Maria shifted her aim toward the machine gun position, her M24 tracking smoothly as she adjusted her point of aim. The PKM gunner had positioned himself behind the engine block of the rear pickup truck, using the vehicle's mass as protection while maintaining a clear field of fire toward the American position. It was a tactically sound defensive position, but it also presented Maria with a clearly defined target. The range to the machine gun position was approximately 480 meters, slightly closer than her first shot, but still requiring careful calculation of ballistic factors. Maria made minute adjustments to her scope settings, accounting for the slightly different range and the fact that the wind had picked up slightly since her first engagement. The morning thermals were beginning to create air currents that could affect bullet trajectory, adding another layer of complexity to the shot. Through her scope, Maria could see the machine gunner's head and upper torso as he prepared to fire another burst. The PKM was a formidable weapon, but like most Soviet-era equipment, it was designed for durability rather than precision. The gunner would need to expose himself to aim and fire effectively, creating a window of opportunity for a skilled marksman. "Target acquired," Maria announced quietly. "PKM gunner, 480 meters behind the rear vehicle." She settled into her firing position once again, her body falling into the familiar rhythm of controlled breathing and precise muscle control. The M24 felt solid and responsive in her hands, its weight and balance providing a stable platform. For the precision shot that was required, the machine gunner raised his head to acquire a target, and Maria seized the opportunity. Her crosshairs centered on the man's head, and she began the smooth trigger press that would send the 168-grain bullet across the valley. The shot broke cleanly, with the same crisp trigger pull that had characterized her first engagement. The bullet struck the machine gunner in the head, eliminating him instantly and silencing the PKM. The effect on the remaining fighters was immediate and demoralizing. They had just watched their most effective weapon system being neutralized by a single, precisely placed shot from an invisible enemy. Several of them began to move away from their positions, apparently reconsidering their defensive strategy. "Excellent shot," Morrison called out. "PKM is down. Enemy personnel are repositioning." Through his spotting scope, he could see the remaining fighters beginning to spread out, seeking better cover and trying to identify the exact location of the sniper, who had just eliminated two of their comrades with surgical precision. But Maria's attention was focused on the armored Humvee in the center of the convoy, where the high-value target was presumably taking cover. The vehicle's armor made it difficult to engage the occupants directly, but Maria knew that there were vulnerabilities in any armored vehicle that could be exploited by a skilled marksman with the right knowledge and equipment. The Humvee's armor plating covered the doors and windows, but the driver's vision blocks and the commander's cupola still presented potential targets. More importantly, the vehicle's tires were vulnerable to rifle fire, and immobilizing the vehicle would prevent the high-value target from escaping, even if the immediate threat could not be eliminated. "Preparing to target the Humvee," Maria announced as she shifted her aim toward the center vehicle. "Going for the front tire first." Disabling the vehicle's mobility would be a crucial step in completing the mission, even if it didn't immediately eliminate the target inside. The front tire of the Humvee was a large, reinforced military tire designed to withstand difficult terrain and limited combat damage. However, a 7.62 x 5.1 round traveling at high velocity could certainly penetrate the tire and potentially damage the wheel rim, effectively immobilizing the vehicle. Maria centered her crosshairs on the front tire, adjusting for the slight downward angle of the shot. The M24 fired again, its bolt cycling smoothly as Maria worked the action to chamber another round. The bullet struck the tire with a visible impact, causing it to deflate rapidly and settling the front of the vehicle toward the ground. The Humvee was now effectively immobilized, unable to escape even if the occupants decided to abandon their defensive position. "Tire hit confirmed," Morrison reported. "Humvee is immobilized, no movement from the vehicle." The success of the shot had further demonstrated the effectiveness of the M24 system. Despite its age and the skepticism of Maria's colleagues, the rifle was performing flawlessly under combat conditions, delivering the accuracy and reliability that the mission demanded. The remaining fighters from the convoy were now in a desperate situation. Their most effective weapon had been eliminated, their escape vehicle had been disabled, and they were facing an enemy sniper who had demonstrated the ability to place shots with surgical precision at ranges exceeding 400 meters. Several of them began to move toward the disabled Humvee, apparently attempting to extract the high-value target and move him to a more secure position. "Multiple personnel moving toward the center vehicle," Morrison called out. "Looks like they're trying to extract someone from the Humvee." This was the moment that the mission had been designed to create. The enemy would be forced to expose themselves in order to protect or extract their high-value target, creating opportunities for additional engagements. Maria tracked the movement through her scope, identifying individual targets and calculating firing solutions for each potential engagement. The M24 was ready for sustained fire, its magazine loaded with match-grade ammunition that would deliver the same level of accuracy for each subsequent shot. The rifle's bolt-action design meant that each shot required manual cycling, but Maria had practiced this action thousands of times and could maintain a steady rate of fire while preserving accuracy. The tactical situation was evolving rapidly as the surviving fighters attempted to adapt to the devastating effectiveness of Maria's precision fire. 3 men emerged from the armored Humvee, moving in a coordinated fashion that suggested military training and experience. The center figure was clearly the high-value target, an older man with a distinctive beard and traditional Afghan clothing, who moved with the bearing of someone accustomed to command authority. "HVT confirmed," Morrison whispered into his radio. "Center figure, approximately 50 years old, matches the description from intelligence briefings." The man they had been sent to eliminate was finally exposed, surrounded by 2 bodyguards who were scanning the surrounding terrain nervously. While trying to move their charge toward better cover, Maria tracked the group through her scope, calculating the ballistic solution for a shot at the high-value target. The range was approximately 470 meters, and the wind conditions had remained relatively stable since her previous engagements. The target was moving slowly but steadily toward a rocky outcropping that would provide better protection from sniper fire. But as Maria prepared to take the shot, one of the bodyguards suddenly raised an RPG launcher, aiming it directly toward the American position. The rocket-propelled grenade was a significant threat that could destroy their observation post and eliminate the sniper team in a single shot. Maria had to make a split-second decision about target prioritization. "RPG!" Morrison shouted, his voice carrying real urgency for the first time during the engagement. "Left side bodyguard, he's got us targeted." The man with the RPG was kneeling behind a rock, the launcher resting on his shoulder as he aimed through the weapon's simple optical sight. Maria instantly shifted her aim from the high-value target to the more immediate threat. The RPG gunner was approximately 465 meters away, positioned behind partial cover that exposed only his head and upper torso. The shot would need to be precise and immediate. There would be no time for careful calculation or multiple adjustments. Crosshairs settled on the RPG gunner's head, and Maria fired without hesitation. The M24's familiar recoil and the sharp crack of the shot were followed immediately by the sight of the RPG gunner collapsing backward, his weapon clattering uselessly among the rocks. The rocket-propelled grenade had been eliminated as a threat, but the delay had allowed the high-value target to move closer to cover. "RPG neutralized," Morrison reported. "But the HVT is almost to the rocks. We're running out of time." The remaining bodyguard was pushing the target toward a cluster of boulders that would provide excellent protection from rifle fire. Once the man reached that position, it would be extremely difficult to engage him effectively. Maria worked the bolt of her M24, ejecting the spent cartridge case and chambering a fresh round. The rifle's action was smooth and reliable, exactly as it had been during thousands of training exercises. Despite the intensity of the combat situation, the weapon was performing flawlessly, validating her decision to stick with the older system. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The high-value target was now only steps away from the protective rocks, and Maria knew that this would likely be her last clear shot at the mission's primary objective. The remaining bodyguard was providing cover, positioning himself between the target and the American position while scanning for threats. The man moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had survived multiple combat engagements. Maria shifted her aim to the bodyguard first, knowing that eliminating him would leave the high-value target exposed and vulnerable. The shot was more challenging because the bodyguard was moving laterally across her field of view, requiring her to lead the target and account for his movement. At 460 meters, the timing would need to be perfect. The crosshairs tracked the bodyguard's movement, and Maria fired when he was in the optimal position relative to her calculated lead. The bullet struck him in the center of mass, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. The high-value target was now completely exposed, still several meters away from the protective rocks. "Bodyguard down," Morrison called out. "HVT is exposed and moving toward the rocks. Take the shot." The target had realized his vulnerability and was now running toward cover, abandoning any attempt at tactical movement in favor of speed. Maria quickly worked the bolt and acquired the running target in her scope. The man was moving at an angle. That would take him behind the rocks within seconds, and the shot would need to account for his speed and direction. She led the target by approximately 2 body lengths, accounting for his running speed and the bullet's flight time. The M24 fired for the 5th time during the engagement, its bolt cycling smoothly as Maria maintained her sight picture through the scope. The bullet struck the high-value target in the back, causing him to stumble and fall forward. He attempted to crawl toward the rocks, but his movements were weak and uncoordinated. "Target hit," Morrison announced. "HVT is down and appears to be critically wounded. He's not moving toward cover anymore." The mission's primary objective had been achieved, but Maria kept her rifle trained on the target area, ready to fire additional shots if necessary. The remaining fighters from the convoy seemed to realize that their situation was hopeless. With their leader wounded and their most effective weapons eliminated, they began to retreat from the engagement area. Several of them were carrying or dragging wounded comrades, while others provided covering fire as they moved toward defensive positions further up the valley. "Enemy personnel are withdrawing," Morrison reported. "Multiple casualties visible. The convoy is effectively neutralized." The mission had been a complete success, achieved through the precision fire of a weapon that many had considered obsolete. Maria continued to monitor the target area through her scope, but it was clear that the engagement was over. The high-value target was motionless, the convoy vehicles were disabled, and the surviving fighters were in full retreat. The M24 had performed exactly as she had expected, delivering the accuracy and reliability that had made it a legendary weapon system. But even as the immediate threat subsided, Maria knew that the real consequences of this engagement were just beginning to unfold. Word of what had transpired in this remote Afghan valley would spread quickly through military channels, and the antique rifle that had been dismissed by so many would soon become the subject of intense scrutiny and analysis. Aftermath of the engagement brought a moment of calm to the valley, but Maria remained focused and alert through her scope. Combat experience had taught her that apparent victories could quickly turn into deadly traps if soldiers became complacent too early. The M24 remained trained on the target area, ready to engage any threats that might emerge from the disabled convoy or the surrounding terrain. "Overwatch elements report all clear," Morrison announced through his radio headset. "No movement from the convoy. Secondary observation posts confirm enemy withdrawal to the north." The mission had been monitored by multiple American units positioned throughout the valley, and their reports confirmed that the immediate threat had been eliminated. But Maria's attention was drawn to something unexpected through her scope. She could see that the high-value target, who had appeared to be critically wounded, was beginning to move again. The man was crawling slowly toward a concealed position behind the rocks, and Maria realized that he might be attempting to reach a hidden weapon or communication device. "Target is still mobile," she announced quietly. "He's moving toward the rocks. I have a partial sight picture." The shot would be extremely challenging. The target was mostly concealed behind cover, with only small portions of his body visible intermittently as he moved. Morrison adjusted his spotting scope to track the target's movement. Confirmed. He's definitely moving with purpose. Range approximately 475 meters. Partial concealment behind rocks. The tactical situation required immediate action to prevent the target from reaching whatever objective he was crawling toward. Maria studied the target area carefully, looking for patterns in the man's movement that would create a brief window of opportunity. The high-value target was moving in short bursts, exposing himself for only a few seconds at a time before taking cover behind the rocks. Each exposure lasted no more than 3 to 4 seconds, requiring split-second timing and precise aim. The M24's scope was perfectly suited for this type of precision engagement. The Leupold Mark IV optic provided clear visibility at extended ranges, and Maria had memorized every aspect of its reticle system. She knew exactly how to use the scope's various aiming points to compensate for range and wind, even under the stress of combat conditions. "He's moving in a pattern," Maria observed. "Every 15 to 20 seconds, he exposes his upper torso for about 3 seconds. The target was following a predictable routine, which would allow Maria to time her shot for maximum effectiveness. She began to count the intervals, preparing to fire during the next exposure. The target appeared again, and Maria fired immediately. The bullet struck the rocks just inches from his position, sending up a spray of stone fragments but missing the target himself. The near miss caused the man to freeze in place, apparently recognizing that he was being actively engaged by a skilled marksman. "Close miss," Morrison called out. "Target is stationary now. He knows he's being tracked." The psychological effect of the near miss had been significant. The target was now trapped behind cover, unable to move without exposing himself to precise rifle fire. Maria worked the bolt of her M24, chambering another round while keeping her scope focused on the target area. The weapon's action was smooth and reliable, showing no signs of the stress that had been placed on it during the extended engagement. The rifle was performing exactly as it had been designed to do, providing consistent accuracy and reliability under combat conditions. "Movement," Morrison announced. "He's trying to move again. Same pattern, same exposure time." The target had apparently decided that remaining stationary was more dangerous than attempting to reach his objective. He began to crawl forward again, using the same movement pattern that had nearly gotten him killed moments earlier. Maria tracked the area where the target would appear, her crosshairs positioned to intercept him during his next exposure. The shot would need to be perfectly timed too early, and the bullet would strike the rocks. Too late, and the target would be back in cover. She began her breathing rhythm, preparing for the precision shot that would end the engagement. The target appeared exactly where Maria had predicted, his upper torso visible for the brief window that she had calculated. Her crosshairs were perfectly aligned, and she fired with the same smooth trigger control that had characterized all of her previous shots. The bullet struck the target in the upper chest, eliminating him instantly. "Target eliminated," Morrison announced with obvious satisfaction. "HVT is down and confirmed dead. Mission complete." The engagement had lasted less than 10 minutes, but it had demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of precision sniper fire when employed by skilled operators with reliable equipment. Maria safed her weapon and began the process of collecting her equipment, but her mind was already analyzing the engagement and the performance of her M24. The rifle had fired 6 rounds during the mission, achieving 5 hits and 1 near miss that had accomplished its tactical objective. The weapon had performed flawlessly under combat conditions, with no malfunctions or accuracy problems despite its age. "Outstanding shooting," Morrison said as he collapsed his spotting scope. "That M24 of yours just proved all the doubters wrong. I've never seen precision fire like that." His earlier skepticism about Maria's weapon choice had been completely dispelled by the rifle's performance during the engagement. As they prepared to leave the observation post, Maria reflected on the mission and the criticism that she had received about her choice of weapon. The M24 sniper weapon system had been dismissed by many as obsolete, but it had just delivered a decisive victory against a high-value target under challenging combat conditions. The rifle had proven that reliability, accuracy, and operator skill were more important than having the latest technology. The engagement had also demonstrated the importance of understanding and trusting your equipment. Maria's familiarity with the M24's characteristics and capabilities had been crucial to the mission's success. She had chosen to stick with the older weapon system, not out of nostalgia or stubbornness, but because she understood that mastery of a reliable tool was more valuable than superficial advantages offered by newer technology. The sound of approaching helicopters indicated that the extraction phase of the mission was beginning. Other elements of the unit had moved in to secure the convoy site and gather intelligence from the disabled vehicles. The operation had been a complete success, neutralizing a significant threat to coalition forces while demonstrating the continued effectiveness of proven weapon systems in the hands of skilled operators. As the dust began to settle on what would become one of the most analyzed engagements of the Afghan campaign, Maria carefully safed her weapon and began preparing for extraction. The M24 had spoken definitively in the language that mattered most in combat: absolute precision when lives hung in the balance. The dust clouds kicked up by the extraction helicopters seemed to symbolize the way this single engagement would soon stir up everything the military thought it knew about weapons effectiveness and operator expertise. As Maria carefully secured her M24 for transport, she had no way of knowing that her choice to trust in proven reliability over technological novelty was about to reshape military thinking at the highest levels. As Maria and Morrison made their way to the landing zone, they could see other members of their unit securing the convoy site and beginning the process of collecting intelligence from the disabled vehicles. The operation had been executed with textbook precision, but the real story was just beginning to unfold. Captain Patterson was waiting at the landing zone, his expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal amazement. He had been skeptical of Maria's weapon choice from the beginning, but the results spoke for themselves. 6 shots fired, 5 direct hits, 1 high-value target eliminated, and an entire enemy convoy neutralized by a single sniper using what many considered to be obsolete equipment. "Rodriguez, that was exceptional work," Patterson said as Maria approached the helicopter. "I'll be honest, I had my doubts about that old rifle of yours, but you just proved me wrong in the most convincing way possible." The captain's admission carried significant weight, as he was known for his cautious approach to mission planning and his preference for proven tactics and equipment. Maria simply nodded and began stowing her equipment in the helicopter's cargo area. The M24 was carefully secured in its protective case, the same case that had protected the rifle during transport to dozens of previous missions. The weapon showed no signs of wear or stress from the engagement, its bolt action still smooth and precise after firing under combat conditions. As the helicopter lifted off from the landing zone, Maria could see the convoy site shrinking below them. Smoke was still rising from the disabled vehicles, and she could make out the positions where each of her shots had found their targets. The engagement had lasted less than 10 minutes, but it represented the culmination of years of training and the vindication of her decision to trust in proven technology. Morrison settled into the seat beside her, his own equipment secured, and his mission notes already being compiled for the intelligence debrief that would follow. "You know," he said over the noise of the rotors, "I owe you an apology. I've been giving you grief about that rifle for months, but after today, I understand why you stick with it." The comment highlighted an important truth about military equipment and the relationship between operators and their weapons. Modern technology offered many advantages, but it also required extensive training and familiarization to use effectively. Maria had invested thousands of hours in mastering the M24 system, learning its capabilities and limitations so thoroughly that the rifle had become an extension of her own abilities. Intelligence value of the mission extended far beyond the elimination of a single high-value target. The convoy had been carrying detailed maps, communication equipment, and documents that would provide valuable insight into Taliban operations throughout the region. The successful interdiction of these materials would likely prevent future attacks against coalition forces and Afghan civilians. Back at Forward Operating Base Chapman, news of the successful mission spread quickly through the unit. The story of Maria's precision shooting with her antique rifle became the subject of immediate discussion among soldiers who had previously questioned her equipment choices. The engagement had demonstrated that experience and skill could overcome any perceived technological disadvantages. Staff Sergeant Mike Johnson, who had been among the most vocal critics of Maria's M24, approached her during the post-mission debrief. "I have to admit, Rodriguez, I was wrong about your rifle," he said. "I've been pushing for everyone to upgrade to the newer systems, but what you did today couldn't have been done any better with any weapon." The comment reflected a broader understanding that was beginning to emerge within the unit. Military effectiveness wasn't just about having the latest technology, it was about matching the right tool to the right operator and ensuring that both were prepared to perform under the stress of combat conditions. Maria's mastery of the M24 system had made her more effective than soldiers with newer equipment, but less experienced. The formal debrief was conducted by intelligence officers who were eager to understand the tactical details of the engagement. Maria's shot placement, timing, and target selection were analyzed in detail, with particular attention paid to the sequence of events that had led to the elimination of the high-value target. The entire engagement was reconstructed using GPS coordinates, ballistic data, and witness statements. "The precision of the shooting was exceptional," commented Major Sarah Williams, the intelligence officer who conducted the debrief. 6 shots fired at ranges between 450 and 480 meters, with 5 direct hits and 1 tactically effective near miss. The target selection and timing showed excellent tactical judgment under pressure. The Major's assessment was particularly significant because she had extensive experience evaluating sniper operations throughout Afghanistan. Her analysis would become part of the official mission report, documenting the effectiveness of the M24 system in the hands of a skilled operator. The report would later be studied by military planners and training officers who were responsible for equipment decisions and tactical doctrine. Maria's performance during the engagement had also caught the attention of higher-level commanders, who were always looking for lessons that could be applied to future operations. The successful use of older equipment in a high-stakes mission provided valuable data about the relationship between technology and operational effectiveness. The psychological impact of the mission extended beyond the immediate tactical results. The enemy fighters who had survived the engagement would certainly report the devastating effectiveness of the American sniper fire, potentially influencing future Taliban operations in the region. The knowledge that a single skilled marksman could neutralize an entire convoy from long range would likely make enemy commanders more cautious about movement during daylight hours. As the debrief concluded, Maria reflected on the broader implications of the mission. She had proven that her choice to stick with the M24 system was tactically sound, but more importantly, she had demonstrated the value of expertise and training over technological superiority. The lesson would resonate throughout the unit and potentially influence equipment decisions for years to come. What Maria didn't yet realize was that her story was already beginning to ripple outward through military networks, carrying with it implications that would extend far beyond a single successful mission in Afghanistan. Within hours of Maria's return to base, the ripple effects of her engagement were already spreading through channels she never could have imagined. The impact of Maria's successful mission extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory, reaching into the corridors of the Pentagon and the boardrooms of defense contractors, who were suddenly questioning everything they thought they knew about military effectiveness. Within hours of the engagement, reports of the precision shooting began circulating through military intelligence channels, reaching commanders and analysts who were responsible for evaluating the effectiveness of different weapon systems and tactical approaches. The story of the antique rifle that had stopped an enemy convoy became a case study in the importance of operator skill and equipment familiarity. Colonel David Martinez, the commanding officer of the 3rd Infantry Division, requested a detailed briefing on the engagement. He had been following the debate about modernizing sniper weapon systems, and Maria's success with the older M24 provided valuable data for decision-makers who were considering equipment upgrades across the entire division. This engagement demonstrates something that we sometimes forget in our rush to adopt new technology. Colonel Martinez observed during the briefing, "The most important factor in any weapon system is the operator's ability to use it effectively." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez has shown that mastery of proven equipment can be more valuable than marginal improvements in technology. The colonel's assessment reflected a growing understanding within the military about the relationship between training, experience, and equipment effectiveness. While newer weapon systems offered theoretical advantages in terms of accuracy, range, and ease of use, they also required extensive training and familiarization to realize their full potential. Maria's expertise with the M24 system had been developed over years of practice and combat experience. The story of the engagement began to spread beyond military channels, reaching defense contractors, equipment manufacturers, and military training organizations. The successful use of the M24 system in a high-stakes mission provided valuable marketing data for companies that were competing for military contracts. It also influenced training programs that were designed to prepare snipers for combat operations. Remington Arms, the manufacturer of the M24 system, took particular interest in the engagement. The company had been working to develop upgraded versions of the rifle for potential military sales, and Maria's success provided compelling evidence of the basic design's effectiveness. The engagement data would be used to support marketing efforts and to guide future product development. The psychological impact of the mission on Maria herself was significant but complex. She had proven her point about the effectiveness of the M24 system, but she also understood that the success had come at a cost. The elimination of enemy fighters was a necessary part of military operations, but it carried emotional weight that would stay with her long after the mission was complete. People sometimes think that snipers are detached from the human cost of what we do, Maria reflected during a quiet moment after the debrief. But the reality is that we see our targets more clearly than anyone else. We know that these are human beings with families and lives, even if they're also enemy combatants who pose a threat to our forces. The comment highlighted the unique psychological challenges faced by military snipers, who must combine technical precision with the emotional resilience required to engage human targets at long range. Maria's ability to maintain both aspects of her role, technical expertise and emotional balance, had been crucial to her success during the engagement. The mission also had broader implications for military training and doctrine. The successful use of the M24 system under combat conditions provided valuable data for training programs that were designed to prepare snipers for deployment. The engagement demonstrated the importance of extensive practice with specific weapon systems rather than trying to maintain proficiency with multiple different platforms. Master Sergeant Robert Thompson, the unit's senior sniper instructor, used Maria's engagement as a teaching example during subsequent training sessions. This mission shows why we emphasize weapons familiarity and consistent training, he told his students. Rodriguez didn't succeed because she had the newest or most advanced equipment. She succeeded because she knew her rifle better than anyone else in the unit. The instructor's analysis was particularly important because it addressed a common misconception among younger soldiers who believed that Technological superiority was the primary factor in combat effectiveness. Maria's success demonstrated that training, experience, and equipment familiarity were often more important than having the latest technology. The engagement also influenced policy discussions about military equipment procurement and modernization. Defense Department officials who were responsible for equipment decisions took note of the successful use of older systems in combat situations. The data would be considered in future decisions about whether to continue upgrading existing weapon systems or investing in entirely new platforms. The story of Maria's success began to spread through informal military networks, reaching soldiers and officers who were facing similar decisions about equipment modernization. The engagement provided a compelling example of how individual operators could achieve exceptional results with proven equipment, even when newer alternatives were available. Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Hayes, who was responsible for sniper training at the Army's Marksmanship Training Center, incorporated the engagement into her curriculum. This mission demonstrates the importance of mastering your equipment rather than constantly seeking technological solutions. She told her students, "Excellence comes from understanding your tools and using them to their full potential." The broader military community began to recognize that Maria's success represented something more significant than a single successful engagement. It demonstrated the value of institutional knowledge, the importance of training and experience, and the danger of assuming that newer technology was automatically superior to proven systems. The engagement also had implications for enemy tactics and behavior. Intelligence reports indicated that Taliban commanders in the region had become more cautious about convoy movements during daylight hours, apparently recognizing the threat posed by skilled American snipers. The psychological impact of the mission was extending beyond the immediate tactical results. As Maria prepared for her next deployment, she reflected on the lessons of the engagement and their broader implications for military operations. The success had vindicated her choice to stick with the M24 system, but it had also highlighted the importance of continuous training and the need to maintain expertise with proven equipment. The ripple effects of Maria's successful engagement continued to spread throughout the military community in the weeks following the mission. Training centers across the United States began incorporating the engagement into their curricula, using it as a case study in the importance of weapons, familiarity, and the value of proven equipment in skilled hands. The story became a powerful teaching tool for instructors who were trying to balance the appeal of new technology with the fundamental importance of training and experience. At the Army Marksmanship Unit at Fort Benning, instructors began using Maria's engagement as an example of how individual expertise could overcome perceived equipment limitations. The facility, which trained some of the military's most skilled marksmen, had been grappling with questions about when to adopt new weapon systems and when to continue developing expertise with existing platforms. The Rodriguez engagement shows us that the human element remains the most important factor in any weapon system, explained Colonel Michael Stevens, the commander of the Marksmanship Unit. We can spend millions of dollars on technological improvements, but if we don't have operators who understand their equipment intimately, we won't achieve the results we need in combat. The colonel's assessment was particularly significant because the Army Marksmanship Unit was responsible for developing training standards and equipment recommendations for the entire military. The successful use of the M24 system in Maria's engagement would influence training programs and equipment decisions for years to come. The story also reached civilian law enforcement agencies that were facing similar decisions about equipment modernization. Police departments and federal agencies that employed sniper teams began to reconsider their approaches to weapons procurement, recognizing that extensive training with proven equipment might be more valuable than constantly upgrading to newer systems. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's Hostage Rescue Team, which had been evaluating potential upgrades to their sniper weapons, incorporated Maria's engagement into their decision-making process. The team's commanders recognized that the same principles that had led to success in Afghanistan would apply to domestic law enforcement operations. Precision shooting is precision shooting, whether it's in Afghanistan or in an urban environment, observed Special Agent Sarah Patterson, who supervised the team's sniper operations. The fundamental skills and the importance of equipment familiarity remain constant regardless of the mission profile. The engagement also influenced academic research into military effectiveness and the relationship between technology and operational success. Military historians and analysts began studying the mission as an example of how individual skill and equipment mastery could produce exceptional results under combat conditions. Dr. James Richardson, a defense analyst at the Rand Corporation, incorporated Maria's engagement into his research on military modernization and equipment effectiveness. This mission provides valuable data about the relationship between training, experience, and technological advancement, he noted. It demonstrates that the most advanced equipment isn't always the most effective in the hands of real operators. The researcher's analysis was particularly important because Rand Corporation studies often influenced military policy and procurement decisions. The inclusion of Maria's engagement in academic research would help ensure that the lessons learned would be preserved and applied to future military operations. The story of the engagement also had personal implications for Maria herself. The success had established her reputation as one of the military's most skilled snipers, but it had also brought unwanted attention and pressure. She found herself being asked to speak at training conferences and to provide input on equipment, decisions that would affect the entire military. "I never intended to become a spokesperson for any particular weapon system," Maria reflected during an interview with military journalists. "I just wanted to use the equipment that I understood best and that would help me complete my missions effectively. The fact that it happened to be an older system was secondary to its reliability and my familiarity with it." Her comments highlighted the importance of focusing on mission effectiveness rather than equipment specifications. The engagement had demonstrated that the most important factor in any weapon system was the operator's ability to use it effectively under stress. The mission also had implications for military logistics and supply chains. The successful use of older ammunition and components in Maria's M24 demonstrated that properly maintained equipment could continue to perform effectively long after its initial manufacture. This insight was valuable for military planners who were responsible for maintaining equipment readiness across multiple deployments. The Defense Logistics Agency, which was responsible for supplying military units with ammunition and spare parts, took note of the engagement's implications for long-term equipment support. The mission demonstrated that older weapon systems could continue to provide effective service if they were properly maintained and supported with quality ammunition and components. The story of Maria's success began to influence popular culture as well, with military-themed publications and websites featuring articles about the engagement. The narrative of the antique rifle that had stopped an enemy, Convoy, resonated with audiences who were interested in military history and technology. Military magazines and websites began featuring articles about the M24 system and its continued effectiveness in combat situations. The engagement provided compelling content for publications that were trying to balance technical information with human interest. Stories about military operations. The engagement also influenced discussions about military training and career development. Maria's success demonstrated the value of developing deep expertise with specific weapon systems, rather than trying to maintain basic proficiency with multiple different platforms. This insight had implications for how the military structured training programs and career progression for specialized personnel. As the story of the engagement continued to spread, it became clear that Maria's success represented something more significant than a single successful mission. It had demonstrated fundamental principles about military effectiveness, the importance of training and experience, and the value of proven equipment and skilled hands. These lessons would continue to influence military operations and equipment decisions for years to come. But the story was far from over. The engagement that had lasted mere minutes was about to trigger a comprehensive re-evaluation of military priorities that would reach the highest levels of the Department of Defense. The transformation was complete. What had begun as a routine convoy interdiction in a remote Afghan valley had evolved into a watershed moment that would influence military thinking for generations. 6 months after the successful engagement, Maria found herself standing before a distinguished panel of military officers and defense officials at the Pentagon, about to participate in discussions that would reshape how the world's most powerful military thought about the relationship between technology and human expertise. The mission that had started as a routine convoy interdiction had evolved into a comprehensive case study that was being used to inform military policy and equipment decisions at the highest levels of the Department of Defense. The briefing room was filled with colonels, generals, and civilian officials who were responsible for decisions that would affect thousands of military personnel and billions of dollars in equipment procurement. Maria's presentation was part of a broader review of sniper weapon systems and training protocols that had been prompted by the success of her engagement with the M24 rifle. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maria began, "I want to be clear that the success of this mission wasn't about proving that older equipment is superior to newer systems. It was about demonstrating the importance of training, familiarity, and the relationship between an operator and their equipment." Her opening statement reflected the maturity and professionalism that had characterized her entire military career. General Patricia Williams, the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, leaned forward in her chair. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, your engagement has generated significant discussion about our approach to equipment modernization. Can you explain what factors contributed to your decision to continue using the M24 system?" Maria's response was measured and thoughtful. "Ma'am, the M24 had proven itself reliable in multiple combat deployments. I had invested thousands of hours in learning its characteristics, and I understood how it would perform under different conditions. When faced with a high-stakes mission, I chose to rely on equipment that I knew would perform consistently." The general's follow-up question addressed the broader implications of the engagement. "Do you believe that your success suggests we should delay modernization efforts, or does it highlight the importance of thorough training with any weapon system?" "I believe it highlights the importance of thorough training," Maria replied. "A sniper with extensive experience on a newer system would likely achieve similar results. The key is ensuring that operators have sufficient time and resources to master their equipment, regardless of when it was manufactured." The discussion that followed Maria's presentation revealed the complexity of military equipment decisions. Defense officials had to balance the advantages of newer technology against the costs of retraining personnel and the risks of introducing untested systems into combat situations. Maria's success had provided valuable data for these decisions, but it had also raised additional questions about training requirements and equipment standardization. Colonel Martinez, Maria's former commanding officer, was also present at the briefing. The engagement demonstrated that individual expertise can overcome perceived equipment limitations, he testified. But it also showed us the importance of allowing operators to develop deep familiarity with their chosen systems. The Pentagon review ultimately resulted in several significant policy changes. Military training programs were modified to emphasize equipment familiarity and extended practice with specific weapon systems. Procurement decisions were restructured to consider training requirements and operator preferences alongside technical specifications. The changes reflected a growing understanding that military effectiveness depended on the interaction between personnel, equipment, and training. The influence of Maria's engagement extended beyond military circles. Defense contractors began incorporating the lessons learned into their product development processes, recognizing that technical superiority alone was insufficient to guarantee success in combat situations. The engagement had demonstrated that reliability, maintainability, and operator familiarity were equally important factors in weapon system effectiveness. Remington Arms, the manufacturer of the M24 system, experienced renewed interest in their product line following the engagement. The company had been planning to discontinue production of the older system in favor of more modern designs, but the success of Maria's mission led to additional orders from military units that wanted to continue using the proven platform. Story of the engagement also influenced military education and professional development programs. War colleges and military academies began incorporating the mission into their curricula, using it as an example of how individual expertise and equipment mastery could produce exceptional results under pressure. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, who had been teaching at the Army's Command and General Staff College, developed an entire course module around Maria's engagement. This mission demonstrates the importance of understanding the human factors in military operations. She explained to her students, "Technology alone cannot guarantee success. It requires skilled operators who understand their equipment intimately." The broader military community continued to study the engagement and its implications for years after the mission. The successful use of the M24 system became a standard reference point in discussions about equipment modernization and training requirements. The story was featured in military journals, academic publications, and training materials that were distributed throughout the armed forces. Maria herself continued to serve with distinction, eventually becoming a senior instructor at the Army's premier sniper training facility. Her experience with the M24 system and her success in combat made her a valuable resource for training the next generation of military marksmen. She emphasized the same principles that had led to her success: thorough training, equipment familiarity, and the importance of understanding the relationship between operator and weapon. "The rifle didn't make me successful," she would tell her students. "Training, experience, and understanding my equipment made me successful. The rifle was just the tool that allowed me to apply those skills effectively." Her teaching philosophy reflected the fundamental lessons that had emerged from her engagement with the Taliban convoy. The story of Maria Rodriguez and her M24 rifle became part of military folklore, passed down through generations of soldiers as an example of how individual expertise and equipment mastery could overcome any perceived technological disadvantage. The engagement had proven that in the hands of a skilled operator, proven equipment could achieve extraordinary results, regardless of its age or technological specifications. The mission had lasted less than 10 minutes, but its impact on military thinking and policy continued for years. It demonstrated that the most important factor in any weapon system was not its technical specifications, but the skill and dedication of the person who wielded it. The mission had lasted less than 10 minutes, but its impact on military thinking and policy continued for years. It demonstrated that the most important factor in any weapon system was not its technical specifications, but the skill and dedication of the person who wielded it. Yet as Maria reflected on her journey from that dusty observation post in Afghanistan to the polished briefing rooms of the Pentagon, she realized that the true legacy of her engagement was still being written in training facilities and combat zones around the world. 3 years after the convoy engagement, Maria had transitioned from active combat operations to a role that she never could have anticipated. As the senior instructor at the Army's Advanced Marksmanship Training Center at Fort Benning, she found herself responsible for shaping the next generation of military snipers. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who had been criticized for clinging to outdated equipment was now one of the military's most sought-after experts on the relationship between operator and weapon. The training center had undergone significant changes since Maria's engagement had sparked a comprehensive review of sniper training protocols. The facility now emphasized equipment familiarity and extended practice with specific weapon systems, rather than the previous approach of rotating students through multiple different platforms. Maria's classroom overlooked the same ranges where she had first learned to shoot precision rifles, but the philosophy being taught there had been fundamentally transformed by her success. The most important lesson of the Rodriguez engagement, Maria would tell each new class of students, wasn't about proving that old equipment is better than new equipment. It was about demonstrating that mastery of any system requires time, dedication, and understanding that goes beyond reading technical manuals. Her teaching approach reflected the hard-won wisdom that had emerged from her combat experience. The students who attended Maria's courses came from across the military spectrum: Army Rangers, Marine Scouts, Navy SEALs, and Air Force Pararescue specialists. Each brought their own experiences and preferences, but they all shared a common need to understand how to achieve consistent accuracy under the stress of combat conditions. Maria's reputation for producing exceptionally skilled marksmen had made her course one of the most requested training programs in the military. One particular student stood out during a recent training cycle. Staff Sergeant Kevin Walsh was a young Marine who had specifically requested assignment to Maria's course after reading about her engagement in a military journal. Like Maria 3 years earlier, Walsh had chosen to stick with an older weapon system, a Marine Corps M40A3, that his unit was preparing to replace with newer rifles. "Ma'am, I've been getting pressure to upgrade to the M40A5 system," Walsh confided during a break between training exercises. "My command thinks I'm being stubborn, but this rifle has never let me down. After reading about your engagement, I wanted to learn from someone who understands what it means to trust your equipment." Maria saw something of herself in the young Marine's determination. "The question isn't whether your rifle is old or new," she replied. "The question is whether you understand it well enough to make it perform when everything depends on that performance. Show me what you can do with that M40A3, and we'll work from there." Over the following weeks, Maria worked closely with Walsh to develop his understanding of his chosen weapon system. The training went far beyond basic marksmanship, encompassing ballistics calculations, environmental factors, equipment maintenance, and the psychological aspects of precision shooting under stress. Walsh proved to be a dedicated student who absorbed every lesson with the intensity of someone who understood that his life might depend on the skills he was learning. The breakthrough came during a challenging exercise that simulated the type of engagement Maria had faced in Afghanistan. Walsh was required to engage multiple targets at varying ranges while under simulated enemy fire, using only his older M40A3 system. The pressure was intense, and several students using newer equipment had struggled with the exercise. Walsh's performance was exceptional. He engaged 6 targets at ranges between 400 and 600 meters, achieving 5 direct hits and 1 near miss that would have been tactically effective. His shooting demonstrated the same principles that had made Maria successful: thorough preparation, intimate knowledge of his equipment, and the confidence that comes from extensive practice. "Outstanding work," Maria told Walsh after the exercise. "You've just proven that the most important component of any weapon system is the operator. Your M40A3 performed exactly as it was designed to do because you understood how to use it effectively." The success of students like Walsh validated the training philosophy that had emerged from Maria's engagement. The military was beginning to understand that investing in operator training and equipment familiarity could produce better results than constantly pursuing technological upgrades. The lesson was being applied not just to sniper training, but to military education programs across all specialties. Maria's influence extended beyond individual students to the broader military community. Her engagement had been incorporated into case studies used at war colleges, staff schools, and professional development courses throughout the armed forces. The story was being taught to future military leaders as an example of how individual expertise could overcome perceived disadvantages and achieve mission success. The impact was also visible in procurement decisions and equipment policies. Military units were being given more flexibility in weapon selection, allowing operators to choose systems that match their training and experience rather than mandating universal adoption of the newest available technology. The change represented a fundamental shift in military thinking about the relationship between human factors and equipment effectiveness. As Maria prepared for another day of instruction, she reflected on how far the military had come since her engagement in Afghanistan. The institution was learning to value expertise and experience alongside technological advancement, creating a more balanced approach to military effectiveness that honored both innovation and proven performance. The lessons learned from Maria's engagement continued to resonate throughout the military community, but perhaps nowhere was their impact more profound than in the evolving relationship between defense contractors and the soldiers who used their products. The story of the antique rifle that had stopped an enemy convoy had forced manufacturers to reconsider their approach to product development and marketing, leading to changes that would influence military equipment for decades to come. Remington Arms, the original manufacturer of Maria's M24 system, found itself in an unexpected position following the engagement. The company had been planning to discontinue production of the older rifle in favor of more modern designs, but the success of Maria's mission had generated renewed interest in the proven platform. Military units around the world began placing orders for updated versions of the M24, seeking to combine the reliability of the original design with incremental improvements in manufacturing and materials. The Rodriguez engagement taught us that there's tremendous value in evolutionary improvement rather than revolutionary change, explained Robert Mitchell, Remington's director of military sales. Sometimes the best new product is a better version of something that already works well. The company's approach to product development had been fundamentally altered by the recognition that proven designs could be more valuable than cutting-edge technology. The shift in thinking extended beyond Remington to other defense contractors who were competing for military contracts. Companies began emphasizing reliability, maintainability, and operator familiarity in their proposals, rather than focusing exclusively on technical specifications and performance metrics. The change reflected a growing understanding that military effectiveness depended on the interaction between human operators and their equipment. Leupold, the manufacturer of the scope that had been mounted on Maria's rifle, experienced similar effects from the engagement. The company's Mark IV scope had been considered outdated compared to newer digital systems, but Maria's success had demonstrated the continued effectiveness of proven optical technology in the hands of skilled operators. Orders for the Mark IV system increased significantly following the engagement, as military units sought to replicate the combination that had proven so effective. The academic community also took notice of the engagement and its implications for military effectiveness. Researchers at institutions like the RAND Corporation, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and the Naval War College began incorporating Maria's story into their studies of military modernization and human factors in combat operations. Dr. Jennifer Harrison, a defense analyst at the Brookings Institution, published a comprehensive study of the engagement and its implications for military procurement policy. The Rodriguez case demonstrates that the relationship between operator and equipment is more complex than simple technological superiority, she wrote. Military effectiveness depends on training, experience, familiarity, and the confidence that comes from understanding your tools intimately. The study's conclusions influenced policy discussions at the highest levels of government. Congressional committees responsible for military oversight began asking more detailed questions about training requirements and operator preferences when reviewing equipment procurement proposals. The change represented a more nuanced understanding of how military effectiveness was actually achieved in combat situations. International military forces also took notice of the lessons learned from Maria's engagement. NATO allies, partner nations, and even potential adversaries studied the engagement as an example of how individual expertise could overcome perceived equipment disadvantages. The story was featured in military journals and professional publications around the world, spreading the lessons beyond the American military community. The British Special Air Service incorporated Maria's engagement into their training curriculum, using it as an example of how equipment mastery could produce exceptional results under pressure. The German Bundeswehr included the story in their professional military education programs, emphasizing the importance of operator training and equipment familiarity. Even nations with limited military budgets found valuable lessons in Maria's success with proven, reliable equipment. The psychological aspects of Maria's story also attracted attention from military psychiatrists and behavioral scientists who studied the mental factors that contributed to combat effectiveness. The engagement provided valuable data about confidence, stress management, and the psychological benefits of trusting familiar equipment under extreme pressure. Dr. Michael Stevens, a military psychologist at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, conducted interviews with Maria and other personnel involved in the engagement to understand the mental factors that had contributed to its success. There's a significant psychological advantage that comes from having complete confidence in your equipment, he observed. Rodriguez's success wasn't just about technical skill. It was about the mental clarity that comes from knowing your tools will perform when everything depends on their performance. The research had practical applications for military training and preparation. Training programs began incorporating psychological preparation alongside technical instruction, helping operators develop the mental resilience and confidence that were essential for combat effectiveness. The approach represented a more holistic understanding of what it took to produce successful military personnel. Maria's story also influenced civilian law enforcement and competitive shooting communities. Police departments studying the engagement found valuable lessons about equipment selection and training requirements for their own sniper teams. Competitive shooters analyzed Maria's technique and equipment choices, seeking to apply military lessons to their own pursuit of precision accuracy. The National Rifle Association featured Maria's story in their publications, using it as an example of American marksmanship excellence and the importance of traditional shooting skills. The story resonated with civilian shooters who valued accuracy, reliability, and the mastery of proven equipment over the pursuit of the latest technological innovations. As the influence of Maria's engagement continued to spread through military and civilian communities, it became clear that her success represented something more significant than a single successful mission. It had demonstrated fundamental principles about human performance, equipment reliability, and the importance of training that applied far beyond military operations. The lessons learned in a remote Afghan valley were reshaping how people thought about the relationship between skill, equipment, and success in high-pressure situations. 5 years after the engagement that had changed everything, Maria found herself standing once again in an Afghan valley, but this time the circumstances were dramatically different. She had returned to Afghanistan as part of a military advisory team, helping to train Afghan National Army snipers who would be responsible for their country's security after the American withdrawal. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. The woman whose antique rifle had become legendary was now passing on those hard-won lessons to a new generation of warriors who would face their own challenges with limited resources and aging equipment. The Afghan snipers she was training reminded Maria of herself in many ways. They were working with older weapons that had been donated by various NATO countries, A mix of systems that included everything from Soviet-era Dragunov rifles to American M24s that had seen decades of service. Like Maria years earlier, they were being pressured to achieve exceptional results with equipment that critics might dismiss as outdated or inadequate. "Equipment doesn't make the sniper," Maria told her Afghan students through an interpreter. "The sniper makes the equipment effective. Your job is to understand your rifle so completely that it becomes an extension of your own capabilities." The lesson that had served her so well in combat was now being passed on to soldiers who would need every advantage they could gain. Sergeant Major Abdullah Nazari, the senior Afghan sniper instructor, had specifically requested Maria's assistance after hearing about her engagement through military networks. His own experience had taught him the value of mastering proven equipment rather than waiting for technological solutions to tactical problems. "In Afghanistan, we cannot always have the newest weapons," Nazari explained to Maria during one of their planning sessions. "We must be excellent with what we have." Your story gives hope to soldiers who think they are disadvantaged by their equipment. The perspective was both humbling and inspiring to Maria, who realized that her experience had relevance far beyond American military operations. The training program that Maria developed for the Afghan snipers emphasized the same principles that had made her successful: thorough understanding of ballistics, extensive practice under varying conditions, meticulous equipment maintenance, and the development of confidence through competence. The approach was designed to maximize the effectiveness of whatever equipment the Afghan forces had available. One particular student, Lieutenant Farid Hassan, showed exceptional promise with an older M24 system that had been transferred from American forces. The rifle was nearly identical to the one Maria had used during her famous engagement, and she took special interest in helping Hassan develop his skills with the proven platform. "This rifle has a history," Maria told Hassan as they worked together on the firing range. "It has served soldiers well for many years, and it will serve you well if you understand it completely. Every scratch and wear mark tells a story of soldiers who trusted their lives to this weapon." The connection between past and present, between American and Afghan soldiers, was embodied in the shared use of proven equipment. Hassan's progress was remarkable. Within weeks, he was achieving consistent accuracy at ranges exceeding 600 meters, using the same type of calculations and techniques that had made Maria successful. His shooting demonstrated that the principles of precision marksmanship were universal, transcending nationality and culture when applied with dedication and skill. The success of the training program attracted attention from military leaders and international observers who were interested in cost-effective approaches to building military capability. The program demonstrated that excellent results could be achieved with older equipment when combined with proper training and instruction. The lesson had implications for military forces around the world that were operating with limited budgets and aging equipment. As Maria's deployment in Afghanistan neared its end, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a criticized sniper with an antique rifle to an internationally recognized expert on precision marksmanship and military training. The engagement that had lasted less than 10 minutes had shaped her entire career and influenced military thinking around the world. The final exercise of the training program was designed to simulate the type of engagement that Maria had faced years earlier. Afghan snipers were required to engage multiple targets at varying ranges while under simulated pressure, using their assigned weapons regardless of age or manufacturer. The exercise would test not just their shooting skills, but their ability to apply the lessons they had learned about equipment, mastery, and mental preparation. Hassan performed brilliantly during the exercise, using his M24 to achieve 5 hits out of 6 shots at ranges between 400 and 650 meters. His shooting demonstrated the same principles that had made Maria successful: thorough preparation, complete understanding of his equipment, and the confidence that came from extensive practice. The performance validated everything that Maria had been teaching about the relationship between operator and weapon. "Excellent work," Maria told Hassan after the exercise. "You have proven that skill and training are more important than having the newest equipment. Your rifle performed exactly as it was designed to do because you understood how to use it effectively." The words echoed what her own instructors had told her years earlier, completing a circle of knowledge that spanned cultures and continents. As Maria prepared to leave Afghanistan for the final time, she knew that her story would continue through the soldiers she had trained and the lessons they would pass on to others. The engagement that had started as a routine convoy interdiction had become something much larger, a testament to the enduring value of skill, dedication, and the mastery of proven tools. The antique rifle that had once been dismissed by her colleagues had not just stopped an enemy convoy, it had started a revolution in military thinking that continued to influence soldiers around the world. The lesson was simple but profound. In the hands of a skilled operator, any reliable weapon could achieve extraordinary results. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.